Amy Morin, welcome to the studio. I'm so excited to meet you finally and to talk to you and about your amazing approach to life. I love it.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And I love the fact that you just told me just before we started that you live on a sailboat. So please tell my viewers that you are on a sailboat right now. That is so cool.
I am. So I spent most of the year living on a sailboat. A few years ago, I was living in rural Maine and it was cold and dark, and I became an author. So I didn't have to live right in one place. I could live wherever I wanted. So it occurred to us, let's go do something fun. So we moved to a sailboat in the Florida Keys.
Oh my gosh, what a difference from Maine to the Florida Keys. I mean, totally, that's like, chalk and cheese in terms of weather.
Exactly. So I have to say, there's worse places to be right now than on a boat in the Keys.
Exactly. I think you're in the right place at the moment. So that's really amazing. So do you do a lot of sailing around the world, or do you?
For the most part, we just stay here because the truth is I'm working a lot and I do a lot of Zoom calls, that sort of a thing. Close to airports for travel and stuff like that. So we don't go on a lot of long trips, but we take short trips to go snorkeling and visit coral reefs and that sort of a thing.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic. What a lovely outlet. That's amazing. Get away from the craziness of life and
Exactly.
Oh, that's beautiful. Before we dive in, can you tell us, if I hold up my phone, I've got questions on my phone, the questions for you. Can you tell my audience a little bit about you, what's not in your bio? That's, okay, we heard about the sailboat, that's not in your bio, but just a little bit about you, what's in your bio, what motivates you to do what you do and to keep doing what you're doing?
Sure. So I'm a therapist by trade and taught psychology classes in college and was working as a therapist, wrote the article called 13 Things Mentally Strong People Do, went viral, became an author. So I spend a lot of my time writing and speaking now and talking about mental strength. And I guess what motivates me is the emails and the feedback I get from people. My first book is in 39 languages. So I get readers who will email me from all quarters of the world saying, hey, thank you so much for writing this book. And that's what fuels me to keep going. As long as people have questions about mental strength or as long as they want to know about psychology, I'm happy to keep talking about it.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's really wonderful. Well, you just wrote the book. You wrote the book. Okay, I got to get this because you've written 3 different versions of this, of the 13 things mentally strong people can do. But let's talk about that. The first one, you wrote a great book called 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. Tell us about that book.
So, of course, people want to know, why would you write about what not to do?
Exactly. Focusing on the negative. But it caught my attention.
Right. And so as a therapist, I was taught to build on people's strengths. When they come into my office, I was told, figure out what they're doing well and tell them to keep doing more of that. But, at some point in my career, I thought, well, I'm doing people a disservice if I don't point out that maybe just 1 or 2 bad habits are keeping them stuck. And the only way I can explain it is if I went to see a personal trainer and they told me to run on the treadmill and I kept doing that, I'd hope to see some progress. But if they didn't tell me to quit eating so much junk food, I might not, or I might, after I got done running, I might eat a dozen jelly donuts and then not know that I'm just outdoing all of the hard work I just did. So it became clear to me that, okay, if I want to help people make progress, then it's okay to point out, hey, you have this 1 or 2 bad habits and they're keeping you stuck. They're holding you back. It's counterproductive to all the hard work that you're doing. And, when I first started as a therapist, I thought, oh, this is great. I have all this information I learned in college, and I'm going to tell these people what I learned from textbooks, never imagining how much I did it myself. And I went through a series of losses in my life. My mother passed away. My husband passed away. My father-in-law passed away. And throughout that journey, I just became really interested in mental strength from a personal standpoint. And I started studying the people that came into my office because I wanted to know, how come some people went through hard times and they got stuck, and other people went through hard times and they really flourished and they grew from it? And the more I studied people, the more I realized it wasn't always about what they did. Sometimes it was more about what they didn't do. And so that's what led me to write the book about what not to do. Yeah.
That birthed the book. I know we're looking at your bio and your story. You were very young, as you were widowed very young.
I was 26 and my husband passed away from a heart attack.
I'm so sorry.
You're supposed to have a heart attack when you're 26.
Yeah, very.
And it was, very similar to the way that my mother had passed away from a brain aneurysm. And so she was here 1 minute and gone the next with no warning, no nothing.
And was that close to your husband dying?
So it was 3 years to the day.
Gosh.
Then my husband dies of a heart attack. Same thing. He had no history of known heart issues.
Oh my gosh.
And was completely healthy 1 minute and gone the next. And so what it did to me to lose 2 people in really sudden and unexpected ways, it was tough to wrap my brain around it. I felt like I was just grieving for a whole decade.
Shame. That's terrible. And then you said your father-in-law passed as well?
Right. And so, it was a few years down the road. I had sort of started to rebuild my life. I got remarried and got a new house, a new job. Life's looking pretty good. My father-in-law gets diagnosed with cancer. And, at first they said, oh, we've got this. But after a couple of weeks, they said, it's spreading and there's nothing we can do. And they gave him a pretty poor prognosis. And it was unlike when I lost my mother and when I lost my husband. This time I knew what was coming. I knew and I just kept thinking, I don't want to go through this again. I've grieved so much. I don't know that my heart can take another loss. And that was when I wrote 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do as an article. But it was really a letter to myself that said, hey, just don't do these 13 things right now. Because I thought, there's so much I can't control. There's so many things going on. I can't handle a lengthy to-do list. But if I have just a don't do list, nothing else, if I just don't do these things, I'll be okay. And so I used to read over that list and I found it helpful. And I thought, well, I'll just put it on the internet and maybe somebody else will find it helpful. And then it went viral. 50 million people read that list. And before I knew it, a literary agent called and said, you should write a book. But nobody knew that I had written it as a letter to myself. People thought, you're a therapist. You wrote this because you excel in all this stuff. And I had to eventually come out and say, actually, I wrote it because I too struggle with all 13 of these things.
Oh my gosh, that's what a beautiful, authentic way to start a journey like that. I mean, it's just an incredible thing. And the reason I also wanted to ask you about the grief things is, as we know, with it, people are going through so much grief at the moment.
Right.
Those people that are losing. So I think this message of yours is also very timely. So I would love you to just unpack a few of those 13 for people now, because I know right now there are viewers watching that are suffering from grief from having lost people in COVID-19 or for other reasons, whatever other reasons now. So that would be, I love the concept. So instead of thinking I've got to do this and got to do that, you went through the normal process of grieving, obviously, but this is how you pulled yourself through by focusing what you shouldn't do. Very brilliant concept. I love it. So can you unpack a few for us? Is that okay?
Absolutely. So number one on the list is that mentally strong people don't feel sorry for themselves. And, I really wanted to make it clear that it's okay to be sad and it's okay to grieve, but self-pity is different. It's when you start to think, oh, my life is so much worse than anybody else's and there's nothing I can do about it. And you sort of become hopeless and helpless and you start to stay stuck because you think there's no use in trying. And, there's this big myth that time heals all wounds or time heals everything. I'd have people come into my therapy office 20 years later after losing someone or going through a hard time and then say, how much longer do I have to wait? And I'd have to talk to them about, well, you could wait a really long time and it's never going to feel better. It's about what you do with your time that matters. For a lot of people, that was really eye-opening. And so as a therapist, I knew this, but yet it's so tempting to just sit around and feel sorry for myself and think this isn't fair. How come I have to keep losing people? I don't want to go through this. But obviously that wasn't going to be helpful. So I had to figure out how to go through healthy grief. How do I let myself be sad? How do I let myself be angry? How do I allow myself to feel all of those emotions without falling into that self-pity trap? And it was about just making sure that I didn't start to dwell on all the negative or think about everything I didn't have. I practice gratitude. There's still plenty of things in life to be grateful for, even when you feel like things are really rough. Same with right now. I know so many of us are tempted to talk about what we don't have. People are saying, I don't have a social life. I don't have a steady income anymore. I have to stay home. But we have clean water. We have electricity. We have so many things going on.
We have Zoom to be able to talk to each other through isolation.
Exactly. So many things right now that are positive. And I know it's hard to look at that sometimes, but just changing your mindset and saying, well, every day I'm going to identify 3 things I'm grateful for that can change your whole life.
And there's so much research on that too, isn't there, Amy? Just showing how that shifts the brain. I do clinical trials and we're looking at the mind-brain connection and the physiology. And it's amazing how just that shift in perspective, your brain will respond immediately because your mind controls your brain and your brain just responds. So, you can get your brain and body under control through that. Doesn't mean it's going to be fun. I mean, I'm sure you still had a lot of tears, but just that mind shift gave you strength, didn't it, to start moving those few steps forward?
It did. And the research on gratitude, I feel like it solved so many issues in our lives, from sleep issues to our health problems to depression, anxiety, those things that can all help combat a lot of the problems that we face. And so just to make that mindset shift and say, okay, I'm going to be really conscious about identifying what I feel grateful for. And then it wasn't just thinking it, sometimes it was expressing it. How do I reach out to the people who are helping me in my life? How do I let them know that I feel grateful for them? That packs a powerful punch. Not only do you then help them to feel better, but it helps you feel better when you express your gratitude too.
Oh, that's lovely. So thinking what you're grateful for and expressing your gratitude. So is that the third and the fourth one?
So no,
Are they separate ones? Or
is to not feel sorry for yourself.
Okay. So those are some of the techniques within that.
Exactly. So antidote to self-pity. I think that one of the other big ones in the book is actually number 2, which is that mentally strong people don't give away their power.
Ah, wow. That sounds good.
About a lot of the language that we use when we say somebody drives us crazy or somebody makes us mad. And sometimes just switching the language that you use, or you say, I have to do this. I have to go to work. I have to go to the grocery store. Almost as if we're victims of everything in life. And so just flipping the switch and saying, okay, this is a choice. I don't have to go to work. Sure, maybe if you don't show up, you don't get paid, but just recognizing it's a choice makes a huge difference in your life. And deciding that you're in control of how you feel. I have so many people that would come into my therapy office and say, my mother-in-law makes me feel so bad about myself. And so empowering them was really about realizing maybe she's really critical of you, but it doesn't have to affect your self-worth. Here's some things you can do, whether it's setting a boundary or it's about changing the way that you think or not internalizing everything that she says. And I think right now, the language that we use is especially powerful too. If you say, I'm stuck at home versus I'm choosing to stay home to stay safer, there's a big difference in that. Or for people who are saying, this isn't fair because we can't get out and do whatever we want, just shifting your mindset and saying, well, I'm choosing not to get out there right now because I want to keep myself and other people safe, really changes the way you feel.
Oh, I can't agree with you more. It shifts the way that your body handles stress, because stress is actually good for you. So what you've actually just described is that whole shift physiologically in our body and brain that happens when we shift stress. Because when you say, oh, I have to stay at home, it's so terrible, I'm isolated, I can't see anyone, you immediately go into toxic stress and 1,400 neurophysiological responses work against you and your brain just goes into like insane states. So by you just saying that simple statement of rather say, well, I choose to stay at home to keep myself, that is absolutely brilliant, because now suddenly 1,400 neurophysiological responses work for you instead of against you. So you feel so much better. That's just amazing. Just such a simple flip of the switch, as you say. I love that one. That's really good. So Amy, you made a comment that I thought was very important, and you said that we can say things like, that person makes me mad, or they have been so critical, or whatever. So someone's putting something on you, but you have to take that. Or you can choose not to. You were explaining that. Can you dive a little deeper into that? Because I think that's really important. Because people kind of feel like victims. I think that whatever someone else does to them, they just got to absorb and process. But you don't. You can resist stuff.
Right. Sometimes we think, well, so-and-so makes me mad because they did something I don't like. But taking back your power is about saying, well, I don't like what that person did, but it's up to me to control my emotions. So you might manage your anger by going for a walk, you take some deep breaths, you do yoga, you meditate, whatever it is. But just owning it makes a big difference, to say I'm in control of how I think, feel, and behave, and it's up to me to decide how I respond to other people.
That's very powerful. You can choose that response. You can choose how you think, feel, and choose in any one moment. That's really, I love that. And then can you give us a couple more of the 13?
Sure. Another one that people often want to talk about is that mentally strong people don't worry about pleasing everyone.
That's a great one.
People pleasers. It's tough to break that habit. But so many people lose sight of their values. They forget who they are. They end up saying yes to everything and don't end up living the kind of life that they want to live. And the research on people pleasing is pretty profound. So that the number one way to drain your willpower is to become a people pleaser. If you have goals and you can't reach them, that's a great place to start looking. Are you doing so much throughout the day to please other people that you aren't working on yourself? Because when you say yes to everybody else, you have nothing left over to say yes to yourself and to work on your own self-discipline.
That's so good. That's so true. So there's a nice measuring stick that you've mentioned there, about the fact that if you're not achieving your own, or you feel very dissatisfied with achieving your own goals, are you spending the day trying to please other people? Now you've drained all your energy, and we've got limited energy in a day, don't we? I mean, it's that we don't have endless amount of energy, and certain things are very draining. Now you've also written, this is amazing stuff. You've also now written books about doing for women and for parenting as well, in terms of the 13 mentally strong. Can you talk about maybe the one for women first, and then we can talk about the one for parents.
Sure. So after my first book came out, I had so many questions from women, especially, who said, what does it look like to be a strong woman? And, we have so many icons of mental toughness, and they're often elite athletes who are men, or they're Navy SEALs who are men. And so women said, well, what does it look like to be a strong woman? And so I wrote this book with that in mind of, okay, how do I give examples of how to be a strong woman in today's world? But I really wanted to look at what are the bad habits that women are more likely to engage in. And it's not because we're bad or we're different, but there's a lot of cultural pressures and societal norms that are different for women. And the way that starting from the way that we raise little girls, we treat them with some subtle differences, but it affects how we respond to things, how we react. We sort of become programmed to do things in a certain way, and those things drain our mental strength. And so in this book, I really wanted to address those sorts of issues and the problems that tend to be more common among women. It's not to say men don't experience them, because I've had a lot of male readers who say, actually, I do a lot of those things too, but they're just more common among women. So for instance, comparing ourselves to other people is a big one.
I saw that when I was listening to some of your stuff, and I thought that's such a good one. I'm so glad you brought that up.
And interestingly, there's studies that will show, let's say that you're looking at Instagram. And as a woman, if you see sort of this ideal looking woman, you tend to think, oh, I could never look like that. When a man looks at an ideal looking man on social media, he thinks, oh, I could do that if I wanted to.
Isn't that amazing?
It is. And
wow.
So, the time that we spend on social media and the cultural pressures that women feel, if you read a women's magazine, it's probably filled with beauty tips and makeup strategies. And even though, women, there's so much pressure, say, to spend doing our hair, putting on makeup, doing those sorts of things, we're busy. And then yet it's filled with productivity tips as if we're not good enough because we aren't able to get everything done in a day.
A lot of pressure in a woman's magazine. You read it for relief, and you're actually adding to your burdens.
Exactly. Quite often that's the case.
Gosh, so what's the antidote?
Well, a big one is to just recognize that when you start to think of everybody as your competition, to realize that they're not. And studies will show if you look at somebody as an opinion holder rather than your direct competitor, then you can learn from that person. Rather than putting yourself down or figuring out, are they above me? Are they below me? You just think, well, that person has some sort of knowledge. And it doesn't mean that they're better than you. It just means they have a skill, a set of tools, something that you could learn from. And when you're open to learning from them, then you can benefit from having those people in your life.
Okay, so there's a key thing that you said, a great, because I'm listening for your antidotes, because you've got some profound little statements that you throw in there. And this one there is that you don't have to feel threatened by them because you can learn from them. And I love that, because that's honestly what everyone's so different. So if we could just have the attitude of learning from each other as opposed to, well, I've got to be in competition with them, it would make our life so much easier, wouldn't it? And there's a lot of research on that too, isn't there?
Right. And if you just looked around and said, I'm going to build a tribe of people who can help me and we can learn and share and not feel like we're taking away from each other if somebody succeeds, that we can build each other up rather than tear each other down, everybody wins in the end.
Exactly. The brain, I don't know if I'm sure you're aware of this, but the brain research, specifically, the mind brain research, when you make the decision to do what you've just described, it actually puts the brain into a very high state of intelligence. So the different energy waves in the brain, the frequency waves, flow differently when you're in that mind state. So that it really does work. Your brain is designed to respond to actually supporting others, not having jealousy and envy, which damages the brain, but actually doing what you've just described, that antidote, that celebrating someone else, that learning from someone else increases your own intelligence. And obviously, if your own intelligence increases, you function at another level.
Right.
Amy, do you think it's got something to do with the society's norms of what success is for not only just women and men, but specifically there's very clear general societal requirements for success, money, recognition, likes on Instagram, but for a woman, I think there's a few others that are specific to women and a few that are specific to men. Do you think that it's that measuring stick that we have to break down that'll maybe free us? I don't know, just a thought.
I do. I think I always encourage everybody to create their own definition of success. When you're 90 years old, what will you look back on your life and be proud of versus, will it matter how many Instagram likes you got? Will it matter how much you weighed? Will it matter how much money you had in the bank? Or do you measure it some other way? And so I think if we just all spent a little more time thinking about our values, what's really important to us, and how we personally define success, we wouldn't be so threatened by other people.
I love that. I really love that. If you defined your success, you wouldn't be so threatened by other people. Okay, so let's talk about parenting now. I know you fostered a child for a while. Do you have your own children now?
I don't know. I was a foster parent most of my adult life.
That's amazing. That's
Yeah,
a
most
huge thing.
girls, they ended up.
Wow.
Because they knew I was a therapist and I was a therapeutic foster parent. So I was sort of the end of the road for the kids that they weren't sure if they could be adoptable. They were sort of deciding whether to let them be adopted or put them in a group home, or some of them were probably headed towards residential facilities. So they said, see what you can do with them. And so my work with sort of the kids that had the biggest behavior problems or the biggest emotional problems, and my job was to try to make sure that they could be adoptable by the time that they moved on from my place. And I'm thrilled to say that every kid before they left my place was available for adoption.
Amy, that is an amazing thing, and I take my hat off to you, because that's very powerful. So, how many girls did you foster in this time period?
It's hard to say. I had some that were short term. I had some that I did respite care for some, just when their normal caregivers needed a weekend or a week break. So I don't know altogether. I've never counted how many, because there were some boys in there too. There were a few younger kids here and there. So hard to say how many over the years.
So did they come and live with you in your home, and you did the whole mothering thing?
They did, yeah. So, it was strange. Sometimes I'd get a phone call at 5:00 in the afternoon and they'd say, can you take this kid today? And I'd come home from work and there'd be a kid, meeting me there, and they've got their bag of stuff and they moved in that day.
Gosh, Amy, that is the most one. It's incredible what you've done. How did you handle that? What were your mentally strong tips in that process? Couldn't have been easy to be bonding with the kids, and then coming in with all their behavioral issues. You have to be a therapist 24/7 and a mother. And how did you do it?
Yeah, it was tough. My hat is off to parents for sure. And to know that they weren't going to stay with me forever. So, but yet you still want to bond with them. But to know that, I wasn't setting out to adopt them forever. My job was to get them ready for their forever home. And so it was hard. It was, as far as emotionally, to say, how do I work with you? I'm not your therapist, I'm your foster mom. So it was sort of like wearing a different hat, because I had to be more nurturing and I had to take care of them and be discipline rules and that sort of a thing. But it was just, incredible. I learned so much from them, and I'm just grateful that I had the experience and the opportunity to do that in my life. I feel like it definitely helped me in so many ways as a human being, just what I learned from these kids who had gone through so much at such a young age. I think I learned a lot about mental strength just from them.
Oh, that's beautiful. And how long would they stay with you? Obviously different time periods, but like a week, month, year? Or...
Yeah, so probably 6 months, somewhere around there usually.
Wow. And did you have more than one at a time?
So they licensed, I lived in a big home at the time when I first started doing it. So they licensed me for 6 kids, which I said, no. 6 is way too many.
That's a lot. I have 4 kids, and 6 would be a lot.
Right. And especially, after I was widowed, I had to decide, do I want to have, how many kids can I handle as a single mom? So I had 2, was usually the most I ever had, maybe 3 on a short-term basis, but it was usually just 2.
Wow. Well, I really take my hat off to you. That's incredible. So you said something beautiful there, that you learned so much from these kids, and I can resonate with that. I have four kids, as I mentioned, and they're all in their 20s now. But I always say that I've got all these degrees, but I learned most from having 4 children and just listening to them. And I always when I was still practicing, I always tell my parents, and I do it when I go around the place talking and all that. I always say, listen to your kids, because they tell you so much. And it's so natural as an adult and as a parent to want to fix or give the advice. But it's so good to also keep quiet and say, what do you think? Give me your advice. Right. They're so insightful. They're brilliant. I don't know how anyone can't see that, how brilliant kids are and how much we can learn from them. So that's just my 5 cents. So obviously your experience stimulated the 13 mentally strong tips of parenting, or however you've written. I think I've written it, mentally strong, whatever the exact title of the book is. So tell me a little bit about that. Let's talk a little bit about that with parenting.
Sure. So, again, after my first book came out, I had so many parents say, how do I teach this to my kids? And so many readers that said, if only I had learned this sooner. So I wrote 13 things mentally strong parents don't do, as a way to say, how do you get out of your own way? How do you make sure that your kids are learning? And so, for example, one of the things that mentally strong parents don't do is that they don't shield their kids from pain. It's so tempting.
I love it. Say that again.
That mentally strong parents don't shield their kids from pain.
That's so good.
It's so hard to see your kid in pain, whether they get rejected or they don't make the team or they're struggling in school. It's just natural that we want to rush in and rescue them and save them and help them and make them feel better. But when we do that, we rob them of an opportunity to practice using their coping skills. We rob them of the opportunity to learn how strong they are. So a much better message is to say, I know this is tough, but I know that you're a strong kid who can handle it. And then you guide them rather than shield them. And you just say, this is how to deal with it. And that doesn't mean we need to expose kids to traumatic things just to toughen them up. But on the other hand, you can teach them. There's plenty of real life opportunities where you can teach kids, well, here are some of the things going on. This is how you deal with it. And then we can teach them skills so that when they become adults, they have confidence. Okay, I can handle the challenges that come my way.
That's so important, because you definitely, in this day and age, you get your sort of parent who wraps a child in, bubble wrap and doesn't want them to experience anything and is jumping in there, solving all the problems and doing all the homework but they crash when they have to go out into life, don't they? I mean, it's just really, that's really good. Can you give us a couple more tips?
Sure. Another one is about not being responsible for your kids' emotions. Again,
so
I think there's too much pressure on parents to raise happy kids. And we feel like if my kid is sad, it's my fault. If they're anxious, then there's something wrong. So we run in and we try to save them from that. So if they're sad, we cheer them up. When they're angry, we calm them down. But we don't teach them how to do those things for themselves. And, there's this startling study where they interview these college kids and say, are you prepared for college? The vast majority of them said academically, absolutely, but emotionally, not. That they felt like, I don't know how to deal with loneliness. I don't know how to deal with anxiety. I don't know how to deal with being sad. If their parents aren't right there, then they don't know what to do. And so I think we're doing kids a huge disservice if we don't teach them, how do you handle your emotions when I'm not here to do it for you?
Okay, so that's probably one of the most important things. You've said so many important things today, but that's so important. And if I just look at the work that I do, you've just identified a core issue around why people battle so much as adults.
Yes.
It's because this is something we should be teaching children from when they're in school, when they're, at school it should be taught when they are young, as a young child in a home. Can you give a few little examples of how to do that? Because I know that we have a lot of parents, a lot of my viewers are parents, and I know they're saying, okay, how do I teach my child how to deal with their emotions? So they have a breakup with a boyfriend, or they get bullied at school, or they get shouted at by their teacher, or whatever.
So a really easy one is to just teach kids how do you identify and label your emotion. Tons of research that says just saying out loud, I'm anxious, I'm sad, I'm scared, takes a lot of the sting out of those feelings. Kids, a lot of them don't have the vocabulary. They don't know how they're feeling. So if you start just using feeling words in everyday language from a young age, that helps. And then you can ask your kids, how are you feeling right now? Check in with them, help them identify it. A kid who can say, gosh, I'm really anxious, but this is a good thing for me. Maybe I'm going to present a speech in class. I'm anxious, but that's an okay kind of anxiety to face. Versus when their friend dares them to do something dangerous and they feel anxiety, they need to recognize, oh, I have anxiety right now because this is a bad idea. And so if we start talking more about feelings, kids will learn from it. And then to teach them, what are some skills? So when you had a bad day at school, how do you cheer yourself up when you get home? An easy way to do that is sit down and make a list with your child. When you come home from school and you're in a really good mood, what are the top 10 things you like to do? I listen to happy music. I call my friends. I go outside and play, whatever it is. But that's your mood booster list. So when you come home from school and you're in a bad mood, maybe you just feel like sitting on the couch and not doing anything, but that will keep you stuck. So go over to your mood booster list and pick something off the list and do it. Even though you don't feel like doing it right now, once you do those things, it will help you feel happier.
I love that. That's such a practical, simple, easy thing to do. It's not so you don't need to, you don't need to be a brain scientist to be able to do that. That's a really simple, practical tip, and kids will really resonate with that. Just making that list, and if they don't want to do that, there's a choice of 10. There's something there that you can encourage them to start doing, and then it starts shifting how they function. That's amazing. Can you give us another tip?
So another one is, when it comes to anger, a lot of us don't know how do you teach kids how to calm themselves down. So we say to them,
that's
calm
good.
down. Or we try
worst thing, isn't it? Isn't that the worst thing to say to someone when they're angry? Calm down. Right, I mean, that's like, now I'm even more mad than before.
So similar to the mood boosters, you can help kids create a calm down kit. And maybe it's a box and you just put stuff in it like crayons in a coloring book. Or maybe it's a journal and they can write or they can draw. Or it's soothing music, something that smells good, scented lotion, something that really engages their senses. But you come up with this kit together, get their input on what they think would work, and you put it in a shoebox and you put it somewhere handy. And when your kid's upset, rather than saying calm down or you have to get a hold of yourself, you can just say, why don't you go do something from your calm down kit? And the goal is that after a while, your child will start to recognize when they're starting to get angry and frustrated, and they won't have to turn to you for help. They can then eventually just go get their calm down kit themselves and figure out, okay, when I'm really anxious, when I'm starting to get really frustrated, these are the kinds of things that bring my mood back down. And it's about trial and error and practice. And they might find, coloring really works for me, so that's something I'm going to do. Or maybe they find if I go outside and I run around for a few minutes, that burns off all of the anger and then I feel better. But to look at it as a bunch of experiments, let them think, okay, you're a scientist and your job is to figure out what kinds of things work best for you and help them come up with ideas, but make sure they give you input too. And then just encourage them to experiment till you figure out what works the best.
That's beautiful. So you're teaching them to think through issues, as opposed to, here's the problem, you the fixer, mom and dad. You're teaching them, okay, this is the problem, but if I go to my mom and dad, they're going to help me think through the solution. So then that goes through into adulthood. So that thinking, feeling, choosing process of experimentation, the little scientist that you're stimulating, we need to teach it from young. That's so incredible, because a very young child, as you know, doesn't have the linguistics to be able to explain how they feel. But then having the coloring pencils or the Lego blocks or something physical to be able to translate that. But then also with you modeling, because that's what I'm hearing you say, you kind of model some samples and then let them take that and grow with it. Because very often if we stimulate it, isn't that the correct thing, that when we stimulate it with one thing, we think of a lot of other ideas that are then suited to how we see the world, kind of thing. But we've got to provide that, as opposed to this dead end. It's almost like a dead end if you solve your child's anger, or you solve your child's emotions, or if you allow your child's pain, absorb your child's pain. I'm thinking of adult children who are trying to deal with stuff. You want to listen and help them think through, but you don't want to try and take that pain into you and then away from them. You can't suck it out of them and put it in you and hope they feel better. Does that make sense?
Exactly.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, basically, exactly, is to just make sure that we're giving kids the tools and skills that they need so that they can say, okay, when I have an emotional issue, I can try to address how I feel about the problem. When I have another problem that I can solve, I've got the skills and tools I need to solve the problem. And then we want them to be confident enough to know, okay, when I face a challenge, whether it's a really tough breakup someday or some sort of economic crisis, I can handle it. Whether they're 30, 40 years old, they still know, all right, my parents trusted me when I was 6 to handle little things. So now I know as an adult, I have the strength I need to get through this too.
Oh, that's so good. I'd love to ask you a question related to this with a lot of your graduate students now, people in their 20s and 22, 23 that have just finished college or have just started a job, and now COVID's thrown their dreams and hopes into this flux. And there is, because I'm sure you've seen in the media, and it's just we're getting a lot of those kind of questions as well with what we do. How would you advise someone who's at that stage in their life to have hope and to manage their sort of emotions in this time, based on what you've just said, this sort of toolkit idea? Because maybe they've never had that toolkit. There's a good chance a lot of them haven't, and now they really are stuck.
Right. So I think it's a good time to just figure out, okay, well, how am I feeling? Are you anxious? Are you angry at the situation? Are you just frustrated? The things you're missing out on. I know college students are missing out on graduation, say, or they missed out on their whole last semester of being able to finish school, that sort of a thing. So just label your feelings. Great time to do that. Take a look at, what are you anxious about? Is it the financial aspect? Is it just the uncertainty? Is it, just anxious about the future of the job market? Figure out, what can you problem solve? What kinds of problems can you actually tackle? So right now it might be a matter of saying, I'm going to figure out how to delay my student loans, or it's a matter of saying, I'm going to use this time as productive as I can to create a resume that is pretty good, so that when this is all over and I start applying for jobs, I have a better chance of getting it. So to take some kind of action right now. And then I think when you catch yourself going down those trails of, this is horrible, it's awful, it's catastrophic, a good thing to do is argue the opposite. Say, well, what are some reasons maybe why that this will actually be helpful? Maybe the job market's changing, but it doesn't have to be for the worse. Or maybe this will lead me down a new career path. Say, well, what would I say to a friend? If your friend came to you and said, this is awful, horrible, I can't stand it, you'd probably have some really nice words. Well, if you give yourself that same advice, it can go a long way to changing your mindset.
That's very, very good. And there's also, just taking that one step further, there's also a lot of feeling amongst the youth at the moment that, this is like, life is terrible. I mean, there's just, look at this, just one disaster after another happens. I've had a couple of these conversations with your millennials and your younger, sort of around that age group from 18 to sort of 25. Life is terrible and it's always been bad and mankind just keep messing up all the time. And what's the point of it all? What advice would you give to someone who throws that in your face? Because I'm sure you got a lot of that with your foster kids. That's why I was thinking of that question.
Right. So I think, okay, well, that's one way to look at the situation. But what's another way to look at it? And again, it goes back to looking at the good in the world. What do you have to be grateful for? And arguing the opposite. What might somebody say if they thought that this was a great time on the universe? Or if somebody says a lot of good things happen too, what would they be arguing? And just flipping that switch and saying, well, that's one way to look at it, but there's a million more. What other ways could I look at it? How else might I argue this? Goes back to what would I say to a friend who had this problem? But just really recognizing that thinking that way isn't going to be helpful. So you have other options. You don't have to think that way.
I think that's lovely. So to summarize what you said, let me hear if I've understood you correctly. You have other options. So you don't have to think that way, number one, because it makes you feel awful. And then number two, you can argue against that. You can actually think of, okay, well, this is how I'm feeling. Even if I don't feel the opposite, what is the opposite argument? Because maybe as you start talking about the opposite argument, your feelings will align. Generally, they do. And then to give advice to yourself as though you're giving someone else advice. So those are 3 little strategies that I understand you correctly.
You got it.
In terms of perfect. Oh, well, I love this. Okay, Amy, what are your concerns about maybe what's going on in the wellness industry out there? Because it's massive at the moment, the self-help wellness industry. Do you have any concerns and do you have any sort of excitement about what's happening? Both ends of the scale, or maybe.
Yeah, I guess, my concern is that a lot of people are more isolated than usual. So for people that were already lonely, I think this is compounding their loneliness. But on the bright side, I feel like there's a lot that has been done in terms of the stigma of depression, of anxiety. More people are talking about it. And there's, online therapy is more available now than it ever has been. And so people who have hesitated in the past to contact an online therapist, right now it's a great time to do it. And I think more people are feeling comfortable about doing that.
Which is great, yeah. And it's become, I think a lot of therapists had to get comfortable with that too, because it's really become, I think every single therapist out there is now literally almost every therapist is doing it online or has got coaching courses or something to help people. So there's more help now. So we've moved into an era of people actually connecting and really making and being ready to face the issues. Any last pearl of wisdom that you'd like to tell our listeners? It's been wonderful what you've said so far. Everything's been so valuable. Any last comment?
Yeah, I would just say you're stronger than you think. Your brain will sometimes underestimate you or doubt you, but just because you think it doesn't make it true. And one of my favorite strategies is just challenge your brain. When your brain says you can't do something, say challenge, accept it, and go try to do it anyway. And you can train your brain to see you differently after a while and to recognize that you're more capable and competent than your brain will give you credit for.
Oh, I love that. That's very wise advice, wise and real advice. I love that. Amy, how can people get hold of you and find you?
The best place is my website, which is Amy Morin, LCSW, as in licensed.clinicalsocialworker.com.
Perfect. Well, we'll put that in the show notes. And thank you for your time. It's been so interesting, so practical. And thank you for doing it on a sailboat. I've never interviewed someone on a sailboat before. It's beautiful. I heard a little bit of the wind in the background. It's so lovely.
Thank you.
Well, enjoy it. And thank you so much for your time and stay safe.
I will. You as well.
Thank you so much.